The Boeing executive extended his hand across the mahogany conference table. $28 million. The number still felt surreal, even with the contract sitting in front of me, every clause meticulously reviewed by my attorney over the past 3 weeks. Mr. Morrison, your aerodynamic efficiency algorithm is going to revolutionize our next generation of aircraft, he said, his grip firm and warm. We're honored to bring this innovation in-house. I adjusted my reading glasses, the same pair I'd worn for the past decade, held together at the bridge with a tiny piece of electrical tape. The irony wasn't lost on me. Here I was, about to become a multimillionaire, and I couldn't even afford new glasses until now. 18 years of working night shifts at the Boeing factory floor, coming home to my one-bedroom apartment in Renton, eating microwave dinners, and spending every spare moment on my calculations. 18 years of silence from the only family I had left. Thank you, I managed, my voice steady, despite the emotions churning inside. I hope it serves the company well. The meeting concluded with handshakes, congratulations, and promises of a formal announcement in 2 weeks. I walked out of that glass tower in downtown Seattle, past the receptionist who smiled at me differently now. Word traveled fast, and into the gray drizzle that characterizes Pacific Northwest autumns. My phone buzzed as I reached my 15-year-old Honda Civic. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me press the green button. Dad? I froze. The voice was older, rougher around the edges, but unmistakable. Robert, my son, the boy I'd raised alone after my wife died when he was 8. The teenager who'd screamed at me that I was an embarrassment, that his friends' fathers had real careers, not glorified janitor jobs. The 20-year-old who'd walked out the day after his college graduation, suitcase in hand, declaring he was moving to California with his girlfriend and didn't want anything to do with his loser father anymore. 18 years. Not a birthday card. Not a Christmas call. Nothing. Robert, I said carefully, leaning against my car door. This is unexpected. I know. His laugh was nervous. Look, I've been doing a lot of thinking lately. Jennifer, you remember Jennifer, right? Well, we got married. Have 2 kids now, and I've been telling them about their grandfather, and I realized life's too short to hold grudges, you know? I saw your name in the Seattle Times this morning. Something about Boeing? That's amazing, Dad. Really amazing. There it was, the Seattle Times article. I'd tried to keep it quiet, but the journalist had tracked me down at the factory, eager for the rags-to-riches engineer story. It had run on page 3 of the business section that morning, complete with my photo and the mention of significant financial compensation from Boeing. I see, I said slowly. We're actually in Seattle right now. Jennifer's parents too, they've never met you. And we thought, maybe it's time to reconnect? We're at a hotel downtown, but honestly, Dad, it'd be really nice to see where you live. Maybe spend some time together? The kids are asking about you. The old Thomas would have cried with relief. The man who'd spent countless nights staring at Robert's childhood photos, wondering where he'd gone wrong as a father. But 18 years of solitude teaches you things about people, about motives, about timing. Where are you staying? I asked. The Westin. But seriously, we don't want to impose. Just, can we come by? Even for an hour? I thought about my apartment. Then I thought about the small house I'd put an offer on just yesterday. Pending the Boeing money's arrival, a 3-bedroom craftsman in a quiet neighborhood in Bellevue. Nothing extravagant, but with a workshop in the garage where I could continue my projects. The real estate agent had been shocked I was paying cash. I'm actually between places right now, I said, which was technically true. Tell you what, let me call you back in an hour. I need to sort some things out. After we hung up, I sat in my car, rain pattering on the windshield, and called the one person I trusted completely. Patricia Chen, my attorney. We'd known each other for 5 years, ever since she'd helped me file the initial patents. Patricia, my son just called me after 18 years of no contact. It was in the paper this morning about Boeing. Her pause said everything. Thomas, as your attorney and your friend, I need to tell you to be very, very careful. Do you want me to be present when you meet? I don't even know if I should meet them. That's your call. But if you do, And if they stay more than a day, I want you to document everything. Times, conversations, requests. Especially requests involving money. I drove to my apartment, my mind racing. The old Thomas whispered that maybe Robert had genuinely changed, that fatherhood had matured him, that I was being cynical. The new Thomas, forged by years of disappointment, knew better. But I called him back anyway. I gave him my address. They arrived at 6 p.m. in a rented Cadillac Escalade. Robert stepped out first, and my breath caught. He looked so much like his mother, the same hazel eyes, the same way of tilting his head when he smiled. He'd put on weight, wore an expensive-looking suit, and his handshake was too enthusiastic. "Dad, look at you. You look great." I didn't. I looked like a 62-year-old man who'd spent decades working factory shifts, my hands calloused, my face weathered. But I accepted the hug, noting how quickly he pulled away. Jennifer emerged next. Blonde, immaculately dressed in designer clothes, her smile perfect and cold. "Mr. Morrison, it's so wonderful to finally meet you. Robert has told me so much about you." Doubtful, I thought, but I smiled politely. The two children, both under 10, were glued to their tablets and barely looked up. And then came Jennifer's parents, Richard and Susan Bradshaw. Richard was a heavy-set man in golf attire, and Susan wore enough jewelry to stock a small store. "So, this is the famous inventor," Richard boomed, clapping me on the shoulder hard enough to make me wince. "Bobby's been keeping you a secret all these years." Bobby. Robert hated being called Bobby. My apartment suddenly felt very small with 6 people crammed into it. I'd hastily cleaned that afternoon, but there was no hiding the worn furniture, the stack of technical journals, the simple life I'd lived. "It's cozy," Jennifer said brightly, in the tone people use when they mean the opposite. "How many bedrooms?" "1," I said. "Oh," her smile faltered. "We were hoping. Well, hotels are so expensive in Seattle, and with the kids, Robert said, you might have room for us to stay a few days." There it was, less than 10 minutes in. "I'm afraid not," I said carefully. "As I mentioned to Robert, I'm actually in the process of moving." "Moving where?" Robert asked, suddenly very interested. "I've found a small place in Bellevue." "Bellevue? That's nice. How many bedrooms?" I saw where this was going. 3, but I'm not closing for another 2 weeks, and there's a lot of work to be done on it. "We could help." Jennifer jumped in. "Richard's great with home repairs. And it would give us time to really reconnect, as a family." Susan nodded vigorously. "Family is everything, Mr. Morrison. And these poor children barely know their grandfather." The poor children were currently fighting over a tablet, completely ignoring the adults. I felt the old guilt rising, the guilt that maybe I had been a bad father, that maybe I owed Robert this chance. But then I noticed Richard examining my bookshelf, specifically the framed photograph of the Boeing contract signing that I'd brought home. "So, this Boeing thing," Robert said casually, sitting on my worn couch. "Must have been quite the payday, huh?" "It's enough," I said neutrally. The paper said significant compensation. "That's pretty vague. What, like 100 grand?" Jennifer elbowed him, but I could see the calculation in her eyes. "It's enough to be comfortable," I repeated. The evening grew increasingly uncomfortable. They ordered take-out expensive sushi from a downtown restaurant, and when the bill came, they all looked at me expectantly. I paid $340 for dinner. Richard cornered me while the others were distracted. "Look, Thomas, can I call you Thomas? Here's the thing. We're in a bit of a bind. Jennifer's boutique in San Diego, it's struggling. She needs about $50,000 to keep it afloat. Now, I know you just came into some money, and we're family now, right? It would just be a loan. We'd pay you back. $50,000. Requested within 4 hours of arriving. I'll need to think about it," I said. His friendly demeanor cracked slightly. "Well, don't think too long. The lease payment's due next week." When they finally left at 11 p.m., with promises to come by tomorrow to see the new house, I sat in my apartment and felt the weight of 18 years of absence. They hadn't asked about my work, my life, my health. They had asked about money 4 separate times in 5 hours. I called Patricia. Document everything, she repeated. And Thomas? Don't give them anything. Not until we know exactly what they want. The next morning, they showed up at 7 a.m. I'd barely had coffee. We brought breakfast, Jennifer announced, breezing past me with bags from a fancy cafe. Again, I somehow ended up paying when she forgot her wallet. So about the house, Robert said. We were thinking, and hear me out, maybe we could move in for a few months? Just while we get on our feet. San Diego isn't working out, and Seattle has so many opportunities. The house has 3 bedrooms, Robert. Where exactly would 6 people fit? Well, Jennifer and I would take the master. Kids in 1 room, her parents in the 3rd. You could take the couch for a while, couldn't you? Just until we find our own place. I stared at my son. You want me to sleep on the couch in my own house? It's temporary, Dad. Besides, you're retired now, right? With all that Boeing money? I'm not retired. I'm still working at the factory. Why? Jennifer looked genuinely confused. If you have millions, why work? I hadn't told them the amount. Who said millions? Robert pulled out his phone, showing me an article from a tech blog. Someone had speculated on patent values and estimated my compensation at $20 to $30 million. It wasn't entirely inaccurate. So it's true. Robert's eyes lit up. Dad, that's incredible. We need to celebrate. And honestly, this changes things. You don't need that big house all to yourself. You could buy something smaller, invest the rest, and help us get established here. Family takes care of family. The next week was a nightmare. They moved into my apartment without asking, claiming their hotel had made a mistake with their reservation. 6 people in my 1-bedroom apartment. The children ran wild, breaking my reading lamp and spilling juice on my research notes. Richard complained about everything: the mattress, the neighborhood, the lack of a second bathroom. Susan rearranged my kitchen to be more efficient. Jennifer left brochures around for luxury cars, vacation homes, and private schools. Just thinking ahead, she'd say with a wink. Robert presented me with a business proposal. He wanted $200,000 to start a tech company. It's a sure thing, Dad. And you'd own 40%. That's generous, considering I'm doing all the work. When I said I needed to review it with my attorney, his face darkened. You don't trust your own son? After everything I'm doing, reconnecting with you? Everything you're doing? I kept my voice level. You've been here 6 days. You've cost me approximately $4,000 in food, broken items, and emergency costs. You've taken over my home, and you haven't once asked how I'm doing. We're family, Jennifer interjected. You don't keep score with family. That night, while they slept, Robert and Jennifer in my bed, her parents on my couch, children in sleeping bags on the floor, I sat in my car and made calls. First, to Patricia. I need to know my rights. Can I evict them? They're not tenants, Thomas. They're guests who've overstayed. You can ask them to leave, but if they refuse, it gets complicated. Especially since Robert is your son, he might claim some rights. But we can handle it. Document everything. Record if you're in a one-party consent state, which Washington is. Second, to a private investigator Patricia recommended, I need to know what I'm dealing with. The investigator's report came back in 3 days. Robert and Jennifer were drowning in debt. Credit cards maxed out. The San Diego boutique had closed 6 months ago. They'd been evicted from 2 apartments in the past year. The Bradshaws had filed for bankruptcy twice. They'd been living in their daughter's car before seeing my article in the newspaper. They weren't here to reconnect. They were here to survive, and I was their lottery ticket. Armed with this knowledge, I did something calculated. I invited them all to dinner at a nice restaurant, my treat, I said. I brought Patricia as my friend. Over appetizers, I made my announcement. I've decided to sell the Bellevue house. 3 bedrooms is too much for me. Jennifer's face fell. What? But we were. Instead, I continued, I'm buying a smaller condo, 1 bedroom, and I've made some decisions about the Boeing money. Everyone leaned forward. I'm establishing the Morrison Foundation for Aerospace Education. $25 million will fund scholarships for underprivileged students pursuing engineering degrees. The remaining funds will support my retirement and continued research. The silence was deafening. $25 million? Robert's voice cracked. You're giving it away? To strangers? Susan gasped. Not strangers. Students who face the same barriers I did, who have the passion but not the resources. What about your family? Robert stood up, his voice rising. What about your son? Your grandchildren? My son who didn't speak to me for 18 years? Who called me a loser and walked away? That son? I was young. I made mistakes. You made a choice, Robert. And you made another choice when you came back, not because you missed me, but because you needed money. Jennifer joined in. You're a selfish old man. We came here to give you another chance, and this is how you repay us? Patricia calmly took out a folder. Actually, let's talk about repayment. Thomas has receipts totaling $6,300 for the past 10 days. Food, damages, transportation. He's also recorded several conversations where you pressured him for loans and investments. In Washington state, elder financial abuse is a serious crime. Richard's face turned purple. Are you threatening us? I'm informing you of the law, Patricia said smoothly, and suggesting that you leave Seattle. Today, the restaurant had gone quiet, other diners watching our table. Robert looked at me with something I'd never seen before, pure hatred. You were always worthless. A factory worker pretending to be important. I'm glad I left. I'm glad I never looked back. And yet you came running the moment you thought I had money, I said quietly. That tells me everything I need to know. They left the restaurant, and by morning, they were gone from Seattle. They'd trashed my apartment on the way out, poured bleach on my couch, broken dishes, torn up photographs. Patricia documented everything for a potential restraining order. I stood in the ruins of my small home and felt nothing but relief. The following months brought clarity. I did buy the Bellevue house, not the 3-bedroom, but a modest 2-bedroom with that workshop I wanted. I established the Morrison Foundation with Patricia as the executive director. Our first year, we awarded 15 full scholarships to students at the University of Washington's Aerospace Engineering program. One of them, a young woman named Keisha from Tacoma, reminded me of myself at 20, brilliant but overlooked, from a family that couldn't afford her dreams. At our scholarship ceremony, she shook my hand with tears in her eyes. Mr. Morrison, you changed my life. I was going to drop out, work full-time, maybe try again in a few years. This scholarship means I can stay in school, focus on my studies, maybe even go to graduate school. That moment, watching her accept the check, was worth more than all of Boeing's millions. I never heard from Robert again, though I did receive a certified letter from a lawyer demanding his rightful share of my estate. Patricia handled it with a tersely worded response about legal rights and familial obligations, of which Robert had none. But here's the thing about betrayal. It clarifies. For 18 years, I'd wondered if I'd failed as a father, if I'd somehow driven Robert away. His return, mercenary and transparent, freed me from that guilt. He hadn't left because I was a bad father. He'd left because I wasn't wealthy enough, connected enough, successful enough in his eyes. And he'd returned not out of love, but out of greed. On the anniversary of the Boeing contract signing, I sat in my workshop, sketching designs for a new project, a more efficient solar panel array. The foundation was thriving. Keisha had invited me to her graduation. My life was quieter but fuller than it had been in decades. I thought about what Robert had said in that restaurant. You were always worthless. But worthiness isn't measured by bank accounts or job titles. It's measured by what you build, what you give, what you leave behind. I was building futures for students who deserved a chance. I was giving back to a field that had given me purpose. And I was leaving behind a legacy that had nothing to do with blood and everything to do with choice. The phone rang. Unknown number. I let it go to voicemail. Some doors, once closed, should stay that way. And some families are the ones we choose to create, not the ones we were born into. I turned back to my designs, the workshop warm with lamplight, and felt something I hadn't felt in 18 years. Peace.